Hi, and welcome. This is Kaylee Curran, President of Curran Compliance Services. I'm thrilled to be launching our first live webinar today. Thank you so much for being part of this debut. This webinar is part of our new initiative called Curran Insurance Compliance Education Program. We call it KICT for short. KICT offers on-demand, so anytime you want, online training. KICT is structured in a way to make a rigorous compliance education program available at an affordable price for all size firms, from the smallest to the largest. Our program is designed in a way to present small enough chunks of information that it's feasible to work through training modules within your busy schedule and while you're balancing competing demands. We have always provided in-person, customized training programs for some of our clients, but the cost for that type of training is prohibitive to many. So we set out to find the best way to provide this essential service in a format that's affordable and that still provides the compliance education you and your coworkers want to meet the demands of your jobs and our industry. We are confident that you will find tremendous value in what we've put together to date, and we will continue to develop into the future. So stay tuned. Watch your email for updates on courses as they post. Also note that at the end of this webinar, an all-important discount code will be available as a thank you from us to you for participating in this, our inaugural webinar. And with that, I turn the program over to Roger Hayashi, co-director of our Compliance and Risk Mitigation Program, to get on with the webinar you came for sales practices and strategies to mitigate them. Roger?
Thank you, Kaylee. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our introductory webinar. The intent of today's webinar is to discuss sales practice risks. And clearly, this is a complex topic, and there's simply no way I can describe every detail of every risk today. What I will do is take about 40 or 45 minutes to walk through a fictional case study. Now, this fictional case study will talk about 4 different areas of sales practice risk. It will provide examples of compliance risks that are inherent to each one of those areas. And of course, I'll talk about some mitigation strategies for the risks as well. So let's get started. Give me just a moment here while I pull the presentation back up for us. Now, as you're probably aware, distribution poses one of the largest risks to carriers. Not that distribution per se is the problem. Most agents, they work hard and they do a great job. And let's face it, sales are necessary to a company. Nothing I say today is meant to impugn the character of agents or anyone else in the distribution chain. In fact, in my experience, many times even the most egregious sales practice problems arise from a lack of knowledge rather than any malicious intent on the part of agents. Certainly, some percentage of agents choose to do the wrong thing, but many agents just don't realize they're doing anything wrong. But there are problems for carriers that arise when there are problems in distribution. Things like lawsuits, regulatory actions, complaints, and reputational damage. So, why is that? Well, consider the following. The agent is often the first point of contact that the consumer has with your company. Agents, they have a ton of responsibility. They have to identify potential consumers, they gather information from them, they identify needs, they select a product that's suitable for the consumer, they present the product, educate the consumer on the carrier and how the product works, answer questions, complete carrier paperwork, they're collecting premium, they transmit all that to the carrier, and when the policy or the contract is issued, often they're asked to deliver that to the consumer. The agent has to retain his or her own records, and they have to maintain the relationship with both the consumer and the carrier. With all of this going on, there's obviously an opportunity for something to go wrong and create risk for the carrier. Now, if the agent happens to be an independent agent, there are additional risk factors to be considered as well. They're working with a wide selection of carriers, they have greater product offerings, and that means there's more to learn, and therefore there's also more to remember, and that increases the chances of misrepresenting a product or a carrier. There's greater use of generic advertising because they represent multiple carriers, and there's limited supervision and oversight from the carriers. And remember, carriers, they typically can't see what happens when the agent meets with a consumer, whether it's across the kitchen table or in an agent's office. They simply can't be with the agent 24/7 to know everything they do and say. However, many issues involve a lack of training or understanding on the part of the agent. Consider this. Agents often receive training on selling, they receive training on marketing, customer service. Carriers provide training to agents on processes, things like completing paperwork. But most agents don't receive any specific or ongoing training in compliance. The lack of compliance training for agents is really unfortunate because most agents, they want to do the right thing, but they simply don't know what's problematic, how to fix it, or why it's important to do so. The first and probably the most important thing your company can do to mitigate sales practice risk is to invest time and resources to educate your agents on compliance issues. That's going to help protect consumers, help the agents protect their practices, and ultimately help protect the carrier. The training doesn't have to be a major expense to be effective. A little training can go a long way. The 4 areas of sales practice risk that I'm going to cover today are prospecting. This is how agents are getting in front of consumers, whether it's through advertising, through seminars, whatever it is. Sales meetings. This is the actual individual sales meeting between the agent and the consumer. Application process, the completion of paperwork and what happens to it. And then after the sale, risks involving the agent after the sale is made. But now let's take a minute to answer a question using our polling feature. You'll see something pop up on your screen that will allow you to answer the question live. Don't worry, your answers will remain anonymous. So here's our first question. Generic advertising created by independent agents, A, is required to be reviewed and approved by carriers. B, is not considered insurance advertising if it is purely educational in nature. C, does not need to comply with state advertising regulations if it isn't carrier specific. Or D, may create liability for a carrier if one of their products is sold as a result of the advertising. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here to make your selections. Looks like we're getting quite a few responses in already. And I see that we continue to have some answers coming in. And what we'll do is we'll leave this polling feature up for you so that you can see this as we move forward. Continuing to get quite a few responses. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to provide the answer to this question for you in just a little while. But first, let's move on to our case study. An independent agent meets an 83-year-old widow at a seminar hosted by the agent. The agent used some generic advertising to attract people to the seminar and had a third-party lead generation company send out mailers to target seniors. The advertising stated it was a purely educational seminar where no sales will be solicited and no purchases required. The advertising went on to indicate that those at or near retirement would lose tens of thousands of dollars in retirement if they didn't attend. There was no compliance review of any of the materials. So, what types of concerns should a carrier have so far? Well, agents, they use a lot of different methods to get in front of consumers. One way is that they will often generate their own advertising. Now, we've heard some compliance people say that they believe agents are only using carrier-approved advertising with consumers, and that simply isn't the case. In many cases, the advertising is generic in nature. In other words, it isn't product or carrier-specific. Many carriers, they choose not to review these materials because they aren't specific to them or their products. And therefore, generic advertising often isn't reviewed by anyone to determine if it's fair and balanced, to make sure it isn't misleading, etc. If you do a quick Google search, you'll find all kinds of problematic generic advertising out there. It's very prevalent in the industry. However, this does not decrease the risk or liability for carriers. If a bad piece of advertising was used by an agent and it led to the sale of a carrier's product, state regulators will likely hold the carrier as well as the agent responsible for the advertising. And if regulators or plaintiff attorneys see non-compliant advertising, they can figure out who the agent is, they'll trace the agent back to the carrier, and they're going to seek to hold the carrier responsible. In fact, Right now, we know that there are some states that are gathering advertising materials today in anticipation of complaints in the future. And that way, they can go back and determine retroactively whether a complainant was misled by the advertising. In this example, the advertising the agent used was misleading. Marketing an insurance sales seminar as purely educational is, generally speaking, not accurate. An agent isn't holding a seminar out of the goodness of his or her heart solely for the purpose of educating consumers. Even if the attendees are told that they won't be sold anything, or no solicitation will occur, or no purchase is necessary, the purpose is ultimately to obtain business for the agent. It's part of the solicitation process, and consumers must understand that they are being solicited by an insurance agent. Advertising regulations are intentionally written quite broadly, and the words used to state the standards are subject to interpretation. Anything that could be deemed to be misleading is likely a violation of state regulations. Now, one problem is that what is misleading to me may not seem misleading to you. And that really makes it difficult for agents, because even if the agent knows what the regulatory standard is, it's hard for them to know what is okay and what is not okay. The advertising targeted seniors. Given the nature of many insurance products, particularly annuities, seniors are often the market that makes the most sense for sales. But that also means advertising is that much more of a risk. There's nothing inherently wrong with advertising to seniors, but states continue to place a greater emphasis on protecting seniors. And as a result, advertising directed to seniors will likely be scrutinized more closely by regulators and plaintiff attorneys, and therefore increase risk to carriers. Along the same lines, use of any kind of scare tactics in advertising will likely draw more attention from regulators. Beyond agent-created advertising, third-party advertising materials are very common in independent distribution. Agents, they can get materials from lead generation companies, from independent marketing organizations. There are lots of other companies as well that they can get materials from. The bottom line, independent agents have access to lots and lots of advertising materials. And similar to other generic advertising, these third-party materials often aren't reviewed by carriers. In many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, there is no review by any compliance personnel for these materials. To mitigate the risk, carriers should first examine their policies regarding advertising that's created by agents and third parties. Does the policy require all advertising that could result in the sale of the carrier's products to be reviewed by the carrier's compliance personnel? If so, how is this going to be enforced, and what happens if a violation is identified? While you could require that any piece of advertising which could possibly result in the sale of your product come in for review, this approach is often unmanageable due to the sheer volume of materials. And as we all know, having a policy and not enforcing it is often worse than not having a policy at all, and I think this is an example of where that could be the case. There are a number of other approaches that carriers can choose from. One idea is to have a policy that requires periodic compliance training on advertising for agents. Random internet searches for problematic advertising could be done to see if it's being used by your agents. Or you could do targeted searches by sampling advertising of higher risk agents. In some cases, an inspection of an agent's office or sending a secret shopper to an agent's event may be warranted. But regardless of the method that's utilized, remember this risk is manageable. You just need to apply some focus and creativity. Now let's go back to the question I posed earlier. Generic advertising created by independent agents, the answer is D. Even though generic advertising doesn't include a specific carrier or product, that won't limit risk or liability to the carrier if their product is sold as a result of the generic advertising. So let's answer another question. An insurance-only licensed agent speaks with a consumer about a fixed life insurance product. The agent can A, discuss securities in general and even make specific recommendations as long as the agent discloses that he isn't registered as an investment advisor. B, recommend liquidating a bank CD even though a penalty would apply for early withdrawal. C, recommend the customer surrender her variable annuity but must disclose the replacement. Or D, recommend selling mutual fund shares since it would not be deemed a replacement. So here again, I will give you a couple of minutes to select your answers. Looks like we've got quite a few responses coming in already. People are still answering. I'm going to give you a couple more minutes here to choose your response. And looks like we still have a few people answering. I'll give you just a couple more seconds here, and then we'll move on. Okay, I think most people have had a chance to make their selections here. Now, let's look at some things that could happen during conversations between the agent and the consumer. Now, typically, this happens in the consumer's home or at the agent's office, and this is when your company's product is actually sold. Now, poor sales tactics used during sales meetings can be the result of many different things. Lack of understanding of what constitutes compliant sales practices is one reason. Another is one that we all know, that some agents use poor sales practices to generate sales and earn commissions. And beyond those commissions, agents can be motivated by other compensation, things like bonuses or incentive travel for reaching certain sales targets. Let's take a look at what happens next with our agent and widow. The agent follows up with the widow after the seminar and agrees to meet her at her home. The widow lives across the state line from the agent. The agent is not insurance licensed in the widow's state of residence. The agent is not a registered representative with a broker-dealer or registered as an investment advisor. The agent attempts to convince the widow to sell her mutual funds and use the proceeds to purchase a fixed annuity. For whatever reason, the widow doesn't want to sell her mutual funds. The agent then learns that the widow has a bank CD, and the agent compares the CD with the fixed annuity and tells her she'll get a higher rate of return for life with the fixed annuity. The widow is still uncertain, but the agent is very insistent, and she finally agrees to cash in her CD and purchase the fixed annuity. Agents must be properly licensed in the appropriate jurisdictions to offer insurance products. In our case study, the agent is completing what is commonly known as a non-resident sale or a cross-border sale. Now, these types of sales occur when a resident of one state buys an insurance product issued in another state. State laws, they really vary on the requirements for these types of sales to be compliant. A few states simply don't allow their residents to purchase insurance products issued in other states. Other states, they have some very specific laws around how these types of sales must be handled. In addition, carrier policies affect whether these types of sales are allowed to occur, and if so, there are typically a number of conditions that have to be met. Why would an agent complete a non-resident sale? Well, agents may be motivated to make a non-resident sale because they believe the version of a product in a non-resident state is better for the consumer than the product offered in the consumer's resident state. In other cases, it could be a licensing issue. The agent may not be properly licensed to do business in the resident state, so they have the consumer purchase the product in the state where the agent is licensed. But regardless of the motivation, non-resident sales must be closely monitored to ensure they're handled in accordance with applicable state laws and also with carrier policies. One topic that's received a lot of publicity in recent years is source of funds. And in this context, source of funds refers to whether a recommendation is made to sell a securities product, something like a variable annuity, a mutual fund, maybe an individual stock or bond, to fund the purchase of a fixed insurance product. So here, our agent is licensed as an insurance agent, but is not a registered rep with a broker-dealer or registered as an investment advisor. And as a result, he crossed the line in this example, and he wasn't properly registered to make a sell recommendation or give investment advice. This is a significant issue to securities regulators as well as insurance regulators. In fact, some state securities regulators have even noted that providing investment advice without being properly registered in their state can be a felony. In our case study, the agent makes several misrepresentations. Misrepresentation is one of the most common sales practice issues, and it means any statement which contains false or misleading information, including misleading information because of incompleteness or omission. While misrepresentation can be unintentional due to, say, the agent not understanding a product feature, intentional misrepresentation can be done to make a product look better to a consumer to entice them to make a purchase. For example, an agent may choose to examine the benefits of the product being sold and not disclose potential drawbacks to the product, things like fees or surrender charges, that kind of thing. As a result, the consumer doesn't make a decision based on all relevant facts. When describing credited interest on an annuity as a rate of return, that's inaccurate, and that also constitutes misrepresentation. Rate of return is a term that's used in the discussion of securities, not with fixed insurance products. In our case study, the agent even goes on to guarantee the widow a higher rate of return for life, another misrepresentation, as there's no way for the agent to know how that annuity is going to perform against CDs in the future. And finally, comparing products in a compliant manner, especially dissimilar products like CDs and annuities, is problematic. It's possible to do it in theory, but in practice it's nearly impossible to do. As I've just discussed here, misrepresentation, it really covers a wide variety of activities. In addition, it often accounts for the greatest percentage of consumer complaints, and that really makes it an important risk for carriers to mitigate. Suitability. Some unsuitable sales are the result of a lack of understanding of the product being sold or not obtaining enough information from the consumer to make an informed decision about what may best fit their needs. In this example, the agent may have made an unsuitable sale. We don't really have enough information to be certain, but based on the facts provided, here are some things that may have affected the suitability of the sale. The agent appeared to make the sale solely based on providing a higher rate of return over the CD. There may have been several other factors that could have warranted having the widow keep the CD. Liquidity, for instance. We don't know if the widow will have adequate liquidity after the purchase of the annuity. And then there were all the misrepresentations that were made by the agent. If the widow didn't have all of the facts, it would be difficult for her to weigh in on whether she had other needs that would counter any benefits of the annuity. Now, many of us, we tend to think of suitability as applicable only to annuities. More and more, we're hearing this language creep into reviews of life insurance sales, and discussion of a similar standard for life insurance has arisen among regulators. I think we can really expect to hear more about this in the future. Mitigating these kinds of sales practice risks involving agents and distribution can be very challenging. As I noted earlier, carriers typically aren't with agents at the time of sale. So what can be done, especially given the limited transparency that carriers have into sales meetings? Clearly documenting carrier policies with adequate detail about the expectations of producers is a vital first step to help protect the carrier. It documents that the carrier understands the issues, and it documents that carriers expect agents to act in a compliant manner. Providing ongoing compliance training to agents and explaining how it helps protect an agent's business is also strongly recommended. And in my experience, monitoring state enforcement actions for issues and sharing those with agents is a great way to help agents understand the seriousness of the issues. Finally, many different levels of oversight, from trending reports to consumer surveys, from on-site reviews to holistic risk-based oversight programs, those are all available to assist with identifying potential problem agents and mitigating the risk they pose to consumers and the carrier. Now, let's go back to our poll question. Talking about the insurance licensed only agent, and the answer is B, recommend liquidating a bank CD even though a penalty would apply for early withdrawal. Any of the other choices here would constitute making what's called a sell recommendation on a securities product, and the agent in our example isn't appropriately registered to do so. Now let's move on to our next question. The agent reviews the completed application and other required forms for the sale of a fixed annuity and realizes the consumer doesn't have adequate liquid net worth to pass the carrier's suitability review. The agent should A, adjust the suitability form by increasing the amount in savings accounts as long as the total net worth remains the same. B, recommend the consumer complete and sign a new suitability form that reflects a greater amount in savings accounts. C, complete new paperwork on behalf of the consumer. Or D, meet with the consumer again and discuss more suitable options. I will give you a couple of minutes here to select your answers. Looks like some of you are taking a little time to read this. That's good. So far it looks like I have a pretty big majority selecting one of our answers here. And okay, let's go ahead and move on here. Let's continue on with our agent and widow. After the application, suitability form, and other paperwork have been completed and signed, the agent determines that the widow's liquid assets won't be sufficient to pass the insurance carrier's suitability requirements. The agent then alters the suitability form without the widow's knowledge to increase the amount of liquid assets so that it will pass the suitability review. The agent then learns that the widow can't see very well and can't drive. So the agent offers to drive her to the bank to cash in her CD. While they're at the bank teller becomes suspicious of the agent's intentions and attempts to stop the widow from cashing in her CD. The agent becomes argumentative at this point and insists that the teller carry out the wishes of the widow and cash in the CD. The teller finally agrees to do so. Our agent has created some additional risk for himself and the carrier in this scenario. The agent incorrectly changed an amount documented on the suitability form after the widow had signed it. Agents should not alter a document after it has been signed. Alterations could consist of adding information that wasn't completed, could involve changing information on the document. In some cases, agents have even had consumers sign blank forms and completed the entire form later. In all cases where a document is altered, there is substantial risk to the carrier because the consumer didn't sign off on the information on the document. We have another issue with how our agent dealt with the widow. The agent learned that the widow can't see very well. And the result? Well, now the agent is dealing with a senior in a one-on-one setting, and the senior can't see very well. And this should raise several questions for the agent. Can the widow see well enough to read and understand the application, the suitability form, and all the other documents that she signed? Does the widow have any other issues that may impair her ability to make this purchase? Maybe there needs to be another meeting where the widow has a trusted family member or advisor with her. Many state laws are providing seniors with greater protections these days, and an 83-year-old widow with poor vision is likely to qualify for additional protections under many state laws. And finally, there's a line between motivating a consumer to take action and intimidation or scare tactics. Regulators rightfully consider intimidation or scare tactics to be inappropriate, and regulators, they're the ones who get to determine where that line is between motivation and intimidation. For example, driving the widow to the bank to cash in her CD could be seen as intimidation. Our agent is making sure the widow cashes in her CD and doesn't change her mind. He's also making sure no one at the bank talks the widow out of it. Mitigation strategies. Training agents on what is expected and what is not allowed is the first step. In many cases, agents may be altering forms to provide what they feel is good customer service to their clients, which is another example of why agent training is so critical to a successful compliance program. And remember, People don't just want to be told what to do. Be sure to explain the why. If you help them understand the reasons and the rationale behind things, they're generally much more receptive and likely to comply. In fact, including the reasons for any policies and procedures is a key to successful compliance training. Training home office personnel, including those who process new business, those who handle policy or contract changes, those who have direct communication with consumers and agents on what to look for, and how to escalate potential issues, is the key to detecting issues. Again, because it's difficult to know what's happening in the agent's office or the consumer's home, detection becomes an important control. And finally, carriers can also design reporting to identify trends by agent that can assist with determining which agents may need additional training or which agents may require some other action by the carrier. Now, back to our poll question. The answer is D. Agents should never alter documents after a consumer has signed them. In addition, only accurate information should be included on documents, and the client should never be convinced to misrepresent anything on documents. Let's move on to our last question for our webinar. The agent receives the contract from the insurance carrier to deliver to the consumer. The agent should A. File the contract in the agent's client file and give it to the consumer the next time they meet. B. Contact the consumer to let them know the contract is in the agent's office and arrange to deliver the contract, but mail the delivery receipt to the consumer right away. C. Contact the consumer and arrange to deliver the contract as soon as possible and obtain a signed delivery receipt. Or D. Retain the contract in the agent's office so that it can be referenced during their annual meetings, but obtain a signed delivery receipt. And again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to choose your response. Looks like we're getting quite a few responses in already. Have a bit more diversity in the answers than our last one, although looks like we have a favorite here. And all right, I think that's enough time. So let's take a look at the final part of our case study. The insurance carrier issues the contract, and it is received by the agent for delivery. The agent calls the widow and tells her he normally keeps his client's contracts as part of his customer service so that they don't get lost and so they can refer to it when they meet annually. The widow agrees to let the agent keep her contract for her. The agent then puts the contract inside the widow's client file and puts it on top of a pile of other client files that he keeps on top of his desk for easy reference. The agent is commonly sent the policy or contract for delivery to the consumer. If the agent fails to deliver the policy or contract, the consumer doesn't have the opportunity to read and understand what they purchased. In addition, it further allows the agent to be the sole, or at least the primary, source of information for the consumer regarding their product. And in some cases, the free look period doesn't start until the policy or contract has been delivered. So failure to deliver keeps that free look period open indefinitely, and that obviously causes significant risk to the carrier. With regard to data security, agents typically keep consumer records, including copies of applications, suitability forms, statements, meeting notes from their meetings with the clients, etc. Because of this, a tremendous amount of personally identifiable information is retained by the producer. While carriers invest a lot of time and money to protect the information they're entrusted with, agents just don't have the same resources as carriers do. Beyond that, many agents have never been educated on the need to protect consumer data or how to do so effectively. As a result of all of these things, information in the agent's care is subject to a breach and creates a weak link in protecting consumer data. Some things to consider here. Do the agent's employees or family members have access to consumer information? Is the agent's office accessed by a cleaning crew in the evenings? Does the agent or the agent's employees, do they use encrypted emails to send and receive consumer data? Does the agent or the agent's employees, do they use any mobile devices for business? And if so, is a password required on those mobile devices? And would the agent know what to do in the event of a breach? Again, because carriers don't have much, if any, transparency into what happens after the sale, it can be difficult to develop effective protocols to prevent or detect unwanted behavior. However, effective controls are available and can be implemented. For example, requiring and following up on signed policy delivery receipts and matching the signature to that on the application or other documents can help ensure the consumer received the policy or contract. This is also a good topic for inclusion in any consumer surveys that may be conducted by the carrier or third party that they've enlisted. As I mentioned before, carriers spend a lot of resources ensuring consumer data is secure in the home office. Providing agents with some training on data security risks, how breaches can occur, and how to keep data more secure, that shouldn't be overlooked. And it's also critical that agents understand your carrier's expectations if a breach should occur, so that appropriate mitigation can begin and any required reporting can be completed. Let's go back to our last poll question. The answer here is C. Policies and contracts should be delivered as soon as possible, and a signed delivery receipt should be obtained to evidence the delivery. Failure to do so does not provide the consumer with the opportunity to review the policy or contract, and as I just said, may extend the free look period. Sales practices continue to present compliance challenges for carriers. The risk environment shifts constantly as new sales ideas enter the marketplace. However, this doesn't mean the risks are unmanageable. A robust compliance program will be able to handle the majority of sales practice issues and will also allow enough flexibility to address new risks that appear. Huge resources are not required for a robust program. It's possible to develop an effective compliance program with just about any budget. But in the end, the fundamentals of compliance, written policies and procedures, continuous training and communication, establishing a strong culture of compliance, and a well-designed supervisory and oversight structure will continue to allow carriers to manage evolving risks well into the future. That concludes my portion of today's webinar. Thank you again for taking time to join us. You're welcome to send me questions via email, as well as any feedback you may have on the webinar or any of the topics discussed today. Thanks again, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kaylee. Kaylee?
Thank you, Roger. Thanks for walking us through that example of what can go wrong in the sales process. Of course, in most cases, all of those problems probably wouldn't happen in a single sale. But on the other hand, there are many more examples of things that could go wrong and other risks your company may face. The number and complexity of the issues is well beyond what we can cover in one short webinar. And that's part of why we're launching KICT, our education and training platform. In KICT, we provide much more detailed education on these and other topics such as advertising review, product filings, back office compliance, and many more. The KICT training on this topic will take you in more detail through various risk mitigation strategies you can put in place to help protect your company. Remember, the training modules are such that you can take them when and where you want, whether you have an hour or only a few minutes. It's both online and on demand. The courses are priced to allow for individual licenses, block, or enterprise-wide licensing. Compliance training just got a whole lot easier and way more affordable. As I said at the beginning of today's program, all of you can receive a code for a discount on your first course worth up to $300. Just press the button on the right-hand side of your screen. Over the coming weeks, we'll keep you up to date on the courses as they become available so you can decide what you want to take as your first on-demand compliance education course. Thank you all for spending a few minutes with us today. We look forward to seeing you in the Current Insurance Compliance Education Program for more detailed information, practical strategies, and concrete steps for mitigating sales practice risks. Current Compliance is your premier source for compliance training. Thank you again for coming. Have a great rest of your day.